that will be subject to all the hypothetical FEMA and act
Right.
conditions.
I would expect that. Oh, question?
You mentioned that taking gas sampling is likely during the winter, but I'm not sure I really understood why.
Well, the thought would be that we have to take a look at the environment when we're doing this sampling with this enclosure. And so if it's during a very hot period of summer, you don't want to put this enclosure over the cask and have the ambient conditions be different than what was analyzed.
For one bit.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't think so, but we haven't fully evaluated that yet. So I'm just saying it's winter time is also a good time to do the test because the staff usually not as engaged. So
Good or bad?
so they're not engaged with refueling outages and other things going on. So that's why it's just something that fit during. But it also has the inherent nicety of temperatures. Any other questions? Okay. Sure. Okay. Anything else? Okay, this is our perhaps best guess schedule. This really hasn't changed since the last time I showed this, so it's something of a repeat. I think that's good because things are on track still. But anyway, January of this coming year, Riva TN will complete their design licensing basis document. Following July of 15, we submit the LAR and a potential exemption request for confinement boundary. In first quarter 16, we plan to ship sister rods to a laboratory to be named. January 17, target for NRC review of our LAR, and dry run functional test completed by June 30th of 17. Loading the cask and begin the thermal soak period by the end of July 17, and then in place at the SC bed somewhere around the third week of August of 17. So I'm sure.
Talking about the middle, you mentioned sometime. If I go back to slide number 10, okay. There you mentioned that CN32B -81. I noticed that the docket 1021, there are three models involved: CN32, CN31 Alpha, and Bravo. Okay. So, how to capture the COC kind of evaluation and determination in your submittal? You're going to reference, you're going to refer it by reference or by some other mechanics in preparing your license amendment request. It seems to be a little challenging as far as the reviewer is concerned. So you have to make very clear whether you are talking about TN32, TN32A, or 2B, and because that could be kind of less clear to many of us when I first read it. So just pay attention to that, how you structure your submittal, and make sure that that part is very clear to the viewers.
That's a good point. And just for your clarification on this, this is a TN32 Bravo test. And the only distinction between it and a TN32 is the Bravo has larger trunnions, single phase trunnions. So, but the Alpha, I think, is a different lid thickness.
It's a different length.
Yeah, different length. Okay, so and we will not be doing an Alpha. It will be a TN32 Bravo. Good. Okay.
Yes, okay. This is the NRC. I do have a couple of questions. So number one, you did not
and talk about the baseline measurement. Once you establish the system, I think you want to do a baseline measurement on all the parameters. So that's something in your plan.
What do you mean by baseline measurements?
Well, if, for example, temperature, the gas content, that kind of thing. We need to at least have a benchmark.
We
number
do.
There.
And maybe it wasn't clear, but during the thermal smoke period, right when we first load it,
Right.
we will be getting the baseline measurements.
Yes, so you have something to compare with in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's something was not very clear. I think
Okay.
we probably thought about that. The second question I'm thinking about is your moisture, probably this is related to your moisture content. How do you kind of establish your moisture content or the remnant in the cap that will be making this demonstration similar to the cap on the path?
We're doing the exact same drying methodology as we have done with all our caps.
Okay, that would provide assurance or reasonable.
Well, it at least gives us a basis for comparison, and that's the 3 millibar hold for a half hour, and that's very consistent in the industry, and so that gives us a basis for comparison. And then if we can then use that same technique and get the measurement of the moisture, then we have an indication of what moisture is.
Yeah, the bottom line is how you validate all of your measurements in the future and the first. So the third one is that you consider your radiolysis of water in the cap. Because we're really talking about very high radiation field inside the cap. Is there any moisture? You said you were going to measure the moisture content over time. Would that be a factor?
Well, we're measuring the moisture, but we're also measuring hydrogen and oxygen content too over time.
Okay, so that's one reason.
So you may be able to.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Yes.
What do you mean by future runoff? Or are there characteristics that you will consider as future runoff?
Okay, that's a good question, actually. I just skimmed over that, and sister rods and how we're going about selecting them. A sister rod is a colloquial term that we use, but it's actually if you think of it as a rod that's not being used in storage, but is otherwise identical to, so it's like a twin of a rod inside the cast. And we have a range of burn-ups from certain assemblies of rods that envelop the rods that are in storage. And so what we can do is use a small sample of the rods that are in storage, or twins to those rods that are in storage, and get baseline data from them so we know what they look like right now. And then later on in time, we could use, if in the ideal world, this cask is shipped off-site for further evaluation, the twin rod can be removed from the cask and evaluated and then compared to the sister rod data that was taken many years before, and to see what those performance characteristics are and how they changed, and therefore, and presumably those effects would be due to dry storage.
Well, initial conditions will be defined in the license application?
No, it's really separate from the license application.
Separate?
I included sister rods. They're not, and I recognize it's somewhat confusing, but it is a part of this program that gets data down the road. It's not really part of the license.
This is Michelle Sampson, Licensing Branch Chief. I would just concur that we are looking for the license application to modify the license for the cast. The additional things that go with the demonstration project, like the sister rods, we wouldn't expect to be a part of the application.
Right. Yeah.
I might have heard you wrong, but you said you were going to send the sister rods through the same drying procedure as I thought we wanted to.
Keith corrected me on that, Bob. I did. You heard me correctly, but I was wrong.
We really want these rods as they're coming out, conditioned as they're coming out of the pool.
Yes. Okay. And Keith can and explain that a little better than I did.
Yeah, like I said, we're just evaluating that process. Steve, you want to add anything? Is that okay? Steve's the one who's working on this, and we did to be able to preserve the condition of the fuel rods in the as-found condition of they're in the pool. One of the things we were concerned about is the drying process in the heat gas and what can happen to the gas heating due to the weather as it's transported. So this conclusion, I haven't published it yet. In fact, I won't publish it because it's proprietary, but we did have NRC perform a thermal evaluation of that entire loading, drying, transport in the LWT for 25 rods and provided them with the range conditions for the fuel. And we got back a maximum calculated class temperature of 150 gas. So we'll be able to preserve the conditions as found during transport and handling, and then if we ever choose to do additional testing, hydrogen orientation and things, so we'll have fuel that we have some conditions to start from.
I'm Sean from NRC. Since the rods do they have contain pellets or anything like that? Or
They're
real rods.
They're real rods, yeah.
Okay.
And they're coming from fuel assemblies that have the same operational parameters as fuel assemblies that are being stored in the cab. So the presumption is that the rods in the sister assemblies are going to be the same as the rods that are stored in the cab.
Okay.
At least from a T0 standpoint.
Like when you start at T0, how do you ensure that the rods you have those 32 assemblies in cast, the conditions are there? Are there leakers? Are there good condition? How do you establish that basis?
Right now we're establishing the basis for all the fuel that we're using here as intact fuel. It's all been tested and examined, so no leakers.
Okay, thank you.
This is John Nguyen from the NRC. Just a quick comment, I guess, on the schedule itself.
Sure.
I have heard a couple of folks from the NRC that, in general, is that the application, we would like to have a quality application. Mm-hmm. For example, when you provide the request, try to provide as much supporting information in terms of the evaluation and things like that. So the evaluation timeline could be shortened.
That's correct. Understand, yes. And the quality of the application depends a lot. Your review time depends a lot on the quality of the application. Understand.
So this is Mark Lombard following up on John's statement about the time frame for the review. I would recommend that we have more pre-application meetings as the application comes together. As the details, you flesh out the details, it will come in the application so we can see and discuss in public meetings as much of that detail as possible before you submit, so that would speed our review, because it's an aggressive time frame that you've stated here for the review, and the best way to ensure that we can meet that time frame is to, again, engage in more pre-application meetings to understand the specifics of the details that will come in the application.
Yeah, and I think we've received that message, and certainly the more discussions we have, especially about the process, and I would expect the next one we'd actually have something together and formulated to go forward. So we're not talking about conceptual practices here. We actually got it laid out and can talk about a little bit more detail.
Okay, thank you.
And Michelle Sampson, licensing branch chief. I'm speaking to dead horse, I'm afraid, but I note that in the schedule you really haven't targeted the exemption request. I'm assuming you would get through the licensing process and come in with the exemption request for the gas sampling following that.
Well, I think we would probably try to get it into you as soon as possible, but it wouldn't necessarily need to be done in parallel, because really that's going to be needed to do gas sampling at the pad.
Okay, that's going to be 2020.
Right.
You're proposing.
Right. So it's not going to be critical path to the actual loading process. So it would have a much longer lead time associated with it.
Okay. Well, I think you heard several questions associated with the gas sampling. So I was just going to reiterate that in addition to your license application, the level of detail and quality of the exemption request is very important.
I agree with that.
Thank you.
This is a softball question.
Not from you, Bob.
In the early days, prior to about 6 years ago, the terms intact fuel and undamaged fuel got sort of thrown around interchangeably, and they were rods that could have pinhole leaks and tight cracks in them. In the last few years, we've made a distinction between intact rods and rods that have no cladding breaches and there's no communication between the inside of the rod and the outside, as opposed to undamaged rods that could have tight pinholes and tight cracks. When you're talking intact here, are you talking the old definition or the new definition? Because it's an important difference for this particular test when you're looking at gas sampling.
I'll even go back a little bit further. When I was growing up, intact meant unconsolidated. And so it had nothing to do with the cladding integrity whatsoever.
I remember that.
But intact in terms of the context I'm using means no cladding penetrations at all, so there's no communication of the cavity gas with the gap gas.
Excellent.
That was a softball, Bob.
Thank you.
I have a question on slide 12. You mentioned that you are going to insert use-on absorbers into the assembly.
Yes.
This is for physicality, safety, or transport, I assume.
That's correct.
So meaning that you've gone close to 5% enrichment, and so you're not satisfied with physicality, safety without the absorbers under flooded conditions?
I have to defer to those doing the calculations. I would presume that would be the case because of the need to have the poison rods, the absorber rods.
Okay, so that takes the physicality, safety during the storage. I assume that you're going to continue with your original licensing basis, that the cask will be dry at all times.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
We're flooded with fluoridated water.
well, that's during loading.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about during storage.
Storage operations.
So, I guess earlier I mentioned that you need to look at your original licensing basis in case if you can still make the same argument given all the modifications that you're making to this cask, additional penetration, and indeed in terms of the, satisfying 124, which is not very prescriptive. It says, two unlikely events. So if you're increasing any chance.
All right.
So generally the staff is going to look at really, how has the licensing basis or safety aspect of this cask has changed from previous license.
Okay. I understand what you're saying.
Right. So those, that's what we would be looking at.
Okay.
In terms of the criticality safety for the modified cask while sitting on the pad for the 10 years.
Sure.
And of course, our colleagues in the confinement area at the home. Ours is going to be very dependent. We're going to rely on the confinement in terms of assuring, watertight.
Sure. Absolutely.
Tony Sharp from NRC. I'm looking at your page 7, your zoning plan. And the peripherals are all thermal and inclined. And I didn't see any of the other two kinds of cladding. And most of the thermocouple lamps are focused, if I read this correctly, on 0 and 5. What's the logic behind that? I don't know how you design these loading patterns to get data from all 4 different classes.
I don't know, Keith, do you want to talk a little bit more about the thermocouple lamp locations and the derivation,
Okay, sure.
if you can.
So, as we talked about, there's 7 penetrations for thermocouples. Eventually, you're going to get to a limit from a structural standpoint on the list. So, TN did some initial work scoping it out to say, okay, where can we put those and tolerate it? And then after their first cut, we went and changed that a little bit to try and spread them out. We've got 2 in the center. We've got, I think it's 2 in that middle ring, and then 3 on the periphery. So we tried to spread out the thermal locations to get a distribution of temperatures from the fuel going through there. And then as far as, well, I guess Tom can address the different fuel types. It's basically the availability.
Right. I mean, you'll see right in the center there we've got the low tin Zerk 4 and Zerk 4. But the thermocouple lances weren't really set out to be monitoring a particular cladding type. Yeah, cladding type. I mean, even though we can balance it out that way, it was really trying to capture the aspects of temperature within the radial regions of the cask, and also for similar type fuel assemblies within different locations to see if they were see how they were performing. So it wasn't really necessarily tried or geared to come up with making sure that we had a Zerk 4 that was monitored and a low tin Zerk 4 that was monitored. It was really more strategically set up for locations and trying to get data that was meaningful across the different fuel assemblies. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, and I'd also add that the Zerk 4 and the low tin Zerk 4 that are in the center are not instrumented, but there's a thermocouple location next to it and diagonal to it. So we've got it really surrounded by some measured locations. So while not instrumenting it, we've gotten real close.
Okay. What about on the outside the Zerlo and M5s, and I don't know where that comes into your logic as you build a smoke tank.
Well, again, as Tom was saying, for just the availability of fuel.
Okay.
The Zerk 4 and the low tin Zerk 4, we basically came up with one of each to get them included in the cask based on the availability of fuel. So then we were left with a bunch of Zerlo and M5s left to fill the rest of the cask.
Looking at the loading diagram and more likely the placement of the thermocouples from the point of view of the usefulness of the data having come in a licensing application, things like being able to determine the distribution axially and radially in the cask so that we can benchmark thermal codes is an important consideration in placing the location of a thermal, more so than are you in a particular type of assembly. The other thing is the axial locations and knowing what that axial profile is, and also trying to get information on critical, important aspects of the way the rod will perform. We discussed this a little bit yesterday, having the thermocouple so that they would give us some information on delayed hydride cracking, like the projected by the Koreans, or knowing where you might be at your DBTT for a particular type of material at the end of 10 years, or maybe in a latter date. So I would encourage you, when you decide that you think that you have the final location of the thermocouple, both axially and radially, that you might want to at least let us, inform us what those locations are, both axially and radially, and logic behind putting those positions.
Okay.
Are there any more questions from the NRC staff or all right, well, with that, I'd like to thank you for your participation in today's meeting.
I'm sorry, is the public going to be able to ask questions?
Thank you, ma'am. I was just about to make a statement. At this point, I would like to turn over to the public for any questions or comments, but when you do that, please identify yourself and your organization before providing comments or questions. So please go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, my name's Erica Gray. I'm with the Virginia Sierra Club in Henrico, Virginia. First of all, this test demonstration project proposed to take place at North Anna Nuclear Power Station, the Dominion has volunteered Virginia for, has not been properly vetted. The citizens have not been informed, and nor have they consented. Since high burnup spent nuclear fuel has different mechanical properties than lower burnup, industry needs additional data on high burnup spent nuclear fuel under typical conditions. So basically, the CAS designers need the data to demonstrate the long-term safety of these systems so they can continue storing the spent fuel beyond the initial license. Obviously, in these studies previously done before, which Dominion initiated back in 1984, the original CAS done for Surrey Nuclear Power Station, we were looking at lower levels of burnup at 45 GWD MTUs. And just because they did it back then doesn't necessarily mean that the citizens of Virginia really care to participate in this project. And also, I could say since 1990, almost all spent nuclear fuel is being removed from the reactors or high burnup. My question is, why has the NRC allowed the use of high burnup spent nuclear fuel, not knowing, how it would perform in storage? It's akin to putting the cart before the horse, which is no different than the NRC, which continues to condone the production of nuclear waste, in which we still have no solution. Looking through the document of the high burnup CAS Research and Development Project final test plan, I noticed statements like, during the first 2 weeks after the cask has been backfilled with helium, the cask will remain inside the North Anna decontamination building, in which any unplanned release of fission gas from the cask can be monitored. I want to know what the worst case scenario is. How much fission gas will be considered safe? Or will the event be considered a law, being it's a test? Plus a statement that the NRC must approve the license amendment, but no other state or local approvals are required. That suggests Virginians have no say in this case. I'd like to know how many lower burnup fuel casks have been opened, inspected to this date, and if there was any damage present. And also, which Department of Energy National Laboratory are you suggesting this test casket be sent? And the last question is, well, it's not really a question, well, sort of. Being that recently in the unfueling or refueling at North Anna Nuclear Power Station Unit 2, they found damaged nuclear fuel rods. There were some of the pellets escaped. I want to know what make and model type were these fuel rods, and are these planned to be used in this kind of project? And that's all I have.
All that's a long list of questions.
That's a long list of questions. I guess for your first question that I picked up on was, why does the NRC allow the storage of high burn-up fuel in absence of data? We have